I'm so glad to see that even though the weather today is not weather that one can imagine, that there's still quite a nice group of people here inside. Um, Maybe we should have changed the name to like the rainy edition or something like that, because that's more suitable. But the reason we chose this name is because many of you may know that we had our first ever conference last 3 months ago. I will tell you all about it in a bit, but I was there, and it was a very nice and cozy day, and in the zoo, and I went home with a nice and fuzzy feeling inside, so that must be a good sign. So first of all, we have a Twitter account, as many of you may know. Please follow it, because we use it to send relevant updates. Something that's new is that we have an open Slack channel, because we want to encourage everyone to join the conversation. Tell us what you need, what you like, what you don't like. If you have suggestions, questions, just go there, join the open channel, and talk to us, please. Thank you. All right, moving on. Many of you may know me a little bit, because I've been on the stage like this before. My name is Tim. I'm one of the organizers of this AmsterdamJS Meetup. I have been doing startups in Amsterdam for about 10 years now. One of the recent startups that I've been working on is Journa. As you can see in the corner, journa.com. It's like LinkedIn for journalism. And I'm very excited to say that since recently, it's really catching on and starting to move. So if you're excited by the idea of doing something about journalism, talk to me. I would be excited to tell you all the details. And of course, I've been an active AmsterdamJS member since a long time, since the very beginning, basically. Enough about me. I'm not the only one doing this thing, of course. It wouldn't be possible to do this all by myself, because AmsterdamJS is a community effort. I want to emphasize this. I try to emphasize this every edition, that the only reason this happens is because the community wants it to happen. I don't plan on doing this forever, so please step up if you think that you can contribute. Other people, very important people, are Robert over there. You probably know him. He's my... I couldn't definitely not do it without him. Rick and Nikolai also are very important, especially this edition. You will discover later on why that is. They're over there. And like I said, join our Slack channel and participate. Come up with suggestions. There's always things you can do. We always need help. Well, the conference wasn't really this rad, but it was just to try out some new CSS blend mode feature that I discovered. Works pretty well. We have videos of all the talks, so if you're interested in some of the topics that were discussed, there were some pretty nifty talks included. Go check them out in our YouTube channel. I'm pretty proud of what we did there. As you can see, this was one of the tracks. As you can see, it's a nice, intimate atmosphere. I think that fits the AmsterdamJS concept very well. And we're definitely planning on doing a new edition next year, early summer 2018. And then, I think this has been our most loyal partner since, I don't even remember since when. He's over there in the corner. Please shake hands if you meet him in the bar later. Thanks to him, we can rent a venue like this, have nice food on the table, some beer on the tap or other drinks, live recordings. We're live recording it again, live streaming it again. You can find the link in a comment in the AmsterdamJS Meetup event page, and also on Twitter, I think. And as always, we will publish the videos after the event. We are always open for discussing more partnerships, so please talk to us if you think your company or your employee might be able to help us out, support us. Just shoot us a message, talk to us. One more announcement to make. We have this new idea, new service basically that we came up with, because we realized that many people out there, and many people among you probably also, they have like all these interesting stuff that they are working on, and they might even be excited to share it, but not all of you or not all of them are very confident or feel like they know how to do a tech talk. And they think like, yeah, I would like to, but I'm not sure if I can, so you know what, let's not do it. I think that's a pity. We think that's a pity. So that's why we invented Speaker Bootcamp. Yes, that's right. For you to be able to raise your hand, and we have a lot of experienced speakers in our network, and we think we can help you. We think we can support you and train you a little bit, like give you some advice. So if you're one of those people that thinks like, yeah, would be interested to become a speaker or do just one talk, but you're a bit hesitant, just shoot us a message. We can probably help you. And this would probably be a very nice stage for you to do your premiere tech talk, right? Yes, question over there.
Where do you find the Slack?
AmsterdamJS.slack.com. I maybe someone with a lot of Slack experience knows how that works.
You can just send your email in Meetup messages, and we'll invite you to the channel. And we'll later create an invite page. Invite page.
Okay, that's a different procedure than I just suggested, but it will probably work. Right, I've already said too much. I think it's time to kick it off. We have a packed schedule today. It's great, it's true. First off, all the way from Argentina, but now living in Leiden, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to talk about a topic about an adventure that I think most of us have or will experience at some point in their careers. He has built his own framework, and he's going to share all the nitty-gritty details, including the ones that none of us wants to know, with all of you. Please give a warm applause for Federico Pereiro.
Thank you so much for being here and coming on such a rainy day, even for the Netherlands standards. My name is Federico. I'm from Argentina, but I've been living in the Netherlands for a couple of years, and so far we're loving it. So anyway, I'm just going to get started with this talk. I've been working on my own front-end framework for a while now. Let's just say the last year I've been doing most of my open source efforts along this direction. And so yes, I'm going to be talking about this, and it's very nice to actually get it out there after so many hours of just coding on my own. You know, coding can be quite a solitary thing. So anyway, I'm going to get started, but this is not going to be probably the way you imagine it. Actually, first I was going to do like the talk saying, okay, this is the tool that I built, this is what the tool does, and here are the details of the implementation, and this is how it compares to other tools, and this is why you might like it or not like it, but I'm not going to do that. And part of the reason is that I found a very cool book this year that I highly recommend to all of you. It's called Start With Why. And the author, Simon Sinek, I think is his name, he basically makes a compelling argument saying that basically the best way to present an idea is not to talk about the idea or the product or whatever, but just first talk about the deep purpose behind the idea. Why you are doing that first, because that's the emotional core. That's the level at which we first relate to an idea. And then you move on to the how, which are the broader outlines of the idea and the fundamentals of it. And then finally you get into the what, which would be the nitty-gritty. And because I have 25 minutes, I think, I won't have any time for that, but you can definitely grill me later outside, no worries. So I started as a developer like 7 or 8 years ago, and to me it was an amazing thing to be able to start coding and doing my own projects, also working with companies and just doing technology. I came from a political science background, so it was pretty hard for me at the beginning. So every day felt like a challenge, really. And over time, after maybe 1 year or 1 year and a half, I started noticing certain patterns that I would have struggles and I would put a lot of effort into it, different days. But I had 2 types of effort, or 2 types of days, let's just say. And these are the archetypes for those days. So here on the left, you might know him from, he did his Rocky Balboa just before he was about to win the Cold War. He was training in Siberia at the moment. And here you have Homer Simpson, when he's about to actually like save the city of Springfield from a nuclear meltdown. So you can both see they're both heroes, and they are both under a lot of stress. They're really trying their best. So some days I felt like Rocky, and some days I felt like Homer Simpson trying to save Springfield. So, and I started to notice patterns about this. So the days that I felt like Rocky, basically when I just jumped into the code task that I had, I just felt a lot of energy. Like saying, okay, I want to do this is what I'm going to do, I'm just tackling this. And also, whenever, when you're all programmers, right? So you're just, things never go as you expect them to go, because there's some design things that you didn't think through, or there's some incompatibility between libraries that you have, or there's always something you didn't expect. So there's always challenges coming up to you. So whenever one of those challenges came up, which happens all the time, even every day, I would basically say, okay, this is a challenge, but this is my challenge. I accept it, I embrace it, this is going to make me stronger and better, and I just go with it. So the other days or other moments I had in my programming efforts, I felt like Homer Simpson here looking at maybe an Angular directive or something very complex. So when I jump into it, it's very hard. It's really hard, and I'm struggling with myself to actually make myself work and just keep on going with the progress. It's very hard. And also, whenever a challenge happens, same as before, I don't feel so much that the challenge is, I don't own the challenge. It's more like something external that happens to me, and I just have to endure it. So to make a long story short, I found out that it wasn't so much about the people I work with, it wasn't so much about the amount of windows I had in my office, and it wasn't so much about the amount of beers I had had the previous night. Basically, certain tools made me feel more like Rocky, where maybe I would have a very strong challenge, but I would still be able to get through with it, and I would get the energy. And other tools made me feel like I was Homer Simpson, and I really don't understand anything that's going on, and it's very hard for me to stay focused and moving forward. So it's a big difference. And I think that the tools that really had this quality that I really liked were simple, but not easy. To give the best example I can give you is Node.js. Node.js, to me, is very simple. It has conceptual models that you can really and readily understand. And those conceptual models doesn't mean that it's easy. You still have to do a lot of the heavy lifting yourself. You need to handle the callbacks. You need to understand what's going on at the operative system at some level. You need to understand about the files. You need to understand, thank you. Oh, that's brilliant. You need to understand about HTTPS and HTTP. You need to deal with a lot of stuff when you're doing a web server, right? But you can do still a lot of stuff. It's like a pull-up, you know? A pull-up is it's simple. It's just lift your body with your arms. But if you have never done a pull-up in your life at the beginning, it's not easy. So these are the tools that really felt good. The ones that didn't feel that good were the complex ones. So basically, let me go back. When I was doing front ends back in 2013, all the tools that were available at the moment, and I could say like maybe the first version of Angular, Meteor, I was also starting to use Knockout, everything made me feel like I was Homer Simpson all the time. And I figured that for career purposes, this was not a good thing to feel. So what I did partly was to move into the backend and just use more Node.js, but I still wanted to do front ends. And I wanted to feel like Rocky when I was doing front ends, not like Homer. So that's why I basically ended up building my own thing. So that was a very long why. Let me see how we're doing with time. OK, we're good, I think. I'm quite accelerated. So let's move on to the how. I think I'm just going to keep my right hand here. Thank you so much.
I don't want to break your laptop.
No, it's my wife, no worries. So I'm moving on to the how. So I'm going to bore you. I'm going to get a little bit more technical now, but still not as boring as this might have been. So you should count yourself as lucky people. So the how. And the how wasn't, how can I build my own framework? No, not really. The how was, how can I write a web app without a framework? That was my question, because I really was burned out by my experiences with frameworks in 2013, 2014. So I said, why do we even need a framework? So I went just all anarchist, minimalist, whatever. So that's how I started. And before I get into it, I really was forced to ponder on a question, which is, what is a modern web app anyway? So, and actually, what's the distinction between a web application and a web page? And it turns out there's a very simple but crucial distinction between a web page. Here you can see Hotmail. I don't know who is as old as me, but I used to use this stuff back in 1999. And this is the first email service, right? Before Gmail, we had this. It actually worked quite well for some. Sorry?
Yahoo was at the same time.
Really?
Yes.
Cool. Cool data. Luckily, I think I wasn't programming back then. Sorry about that. But let's say, so this was 1999, and this is now, right? So it's still the Outlook.com, which used to be Hotmail. So, of course, you have almost 20 years of design and progress in all the tools and whatever, and they look very different. But there's one essential difference between this, which was a web page, and this, which is a web application. And the big difference is basically Ajax or Ajax. So in a web application, the client, the browser, sends requests on the background to the server, gets some data, and then refreshes the page. In the old paradigm, and think before web applications, think 1999, think 2002, think Internet Explorer 5, you just basically, or Netscape, you just have a page, right? The page has links. So you just, when you get the page, the browser renders the page, and that's it. Then if you want to click on something, you click on something and the process starts anew. You go to another page. Or if you're filling a form, because you're creating your own Hotmail account, so basically you just fill the form and you click submit at the bottom. You submit a payload to the server, and the server tells you basically, okay, that's all good or not, whatever. Now go to another page. So back in the day, there was no concept of re-rendering pages, which after 2005 or so, when web applications started getting traction, you had the need to redo the page with client-side JavaScript. So this is the main difference. So this basically at least answers the most minimalist question, which is, why do you need something different now if we used to have just web pages back in the day? So this is the first reason for which you need something, because you have more complexity. This complexity, however, is justified because a web app has offline ability. If somebody remembers in Hotmail, when you were sending an email, right, it just took 5 or 10 minutes to send an email, whatever, and if you click submit and the internet would go down, which happened a lot back in the day, it wouldn't tell you, hey, the email couldn't be sent, please retry. The whole thing would crash, not crash, but you would get like a page not found error, and you could not go back either. You lost all the state. With a web app, and Gmail showed us the path here, you actually have offline ability. So I know this is pretty obvious, but because we take it for granted. It's only been 10 years since these things have come around, and these are the real underlying reasons for which it's so much harder to do things now. But it's at the same time, it's all the more rewarding. And at the same time, it's more efficient, especially when you're in mobile networks. When you're doing a web app, you just load the page once, and then you just retrieve data, and you redraw the view over and over, and there's no need to retrieve the whole page every time, which really helps for scaling, and especially it helps you when you're on a mobile device. So that's I started playing around with solutions. Very horrible solutions. Really, you shouldn't do this. But for example, you have some server code, so I would hit a certain endpoint, and I would basically send a chunk of HTML through the wire. Somebody's saying yes, probably you've been there. Okay, and then you say you have the client code doing an asynchronous request, and you just basically get this piece of HTML and you just append it somewhere. This is absolutely horrible because you have pieces of markup all over your web server. So it doesn't matter how minimalist you are, this is still unpalatable. So I had to move on into something better. So of course, the first change that I did here was basically to say, okay, the server has no markup. That's the base rule, okay? So I'm just going to send some Ajax here. I'm just going to send an array. That's it. And then the client is going to receive an array with JSON, which is the way an API should work right now. So I'm just going to parse this data. I'm going to make it into an array that it was, deserialize it. And then I'm just going to basically, for each of these items, I'm going to append them to my table with the jQuery selector here. And I'm just going to, by hand, do the tags, right? Okay, this is very bad as well, for many reasons. I will get to that later. So I tried becoming smarter, and by smarter I mean like doing more sophisticated, stupid things. Like, for example, having a generic function to create tags on the fly, basically by concatenating pieces of strings. Like, hey, you just put the tag here, and then you put the class or whatever, and then you do these beautiful things, like, for example, quoting a quote. It's not nice, and it's definitely, it's very error-prone, and for example here, I'm always assuming that the tags have to be closed. But actually, there's 14 or 16 tags that should not be closed. They are called void tags. Also, what happens if you don't have a class name? What happens with extra attributes? What happens with nested values? And what happens with things that you have to escape, the HTML entities? So don't try this at home. I mean, of course, go ahead and try it, but you'll know it doesn't take you far. So finally, I had one revelation after being in the swamp for a long while, which is object literals. Yes, finally. So I could use object literals, and object literal sounds very fancy, but just let me take the fancy right out of it. An object literal is either an array or an object. And by object, I mean an object with the curly braces. That's it. So I found out that it's actually very straightforward to represent HTML with object literals. So for example, we have a paragraph here, right? So you have the tag P, the hello inside, and then the P here outside. Can you see the mouse? Yeah. Excellent. So this is a quite straightforward representation, right? It's like, I don't think it can be done any simpler than this. You just have an array where the first item is actually the P, the tag itself, and then the last item is the contents, which in this case is a literal. That's it. Slightly more complicated example. We have attributes. It's the same thing. It's an array. The first element is a P, and then we have basically an object here with the key and the value. You can add more if you want, and if we wanted, we could add some contents as the third element. So this is how you can, this is one way of representing HTML, and you can also do CSS, but I'm not going to go into that now, but it's absolutely possible to represent markup, HTML and CSS, from within JavaScript just using object literals. And this is where it starts to get better, because HTML is not a programming language. There's no logic in HTML, but there is logic in the views. So by using object literals, you're not leaving JavaScript land. We are living inside the JavaScript file, which means we have the full power of JavaScript available. Sorry, I just actually started talking about the next slide. Sorry. Let's go back. This is a nested tag, okay? You have the div outside, and then so we have basically the div here, and then we just put an entire array within here. So I hope that's more or less clear. Sorry, I just got carried away. So what I wanted to say is you can represent nested tags here. But as I was saying before, if you want to put conditionals or you want to put iteration, which is something you need when you're creating dynamic markup on the client, you can just easily do it with code. You don't need anything else. For example, if cond is a Boolean here, I can either show the tag, the paragraph with a hello, or I can show nothing. An empty array represents nothing. So I can also do the same thing for a class. So I have a class here, and depending on the conditional, I can add the h2 class to it, or not put anything there. And this is the most powerful feature, basically, which is you can iterate. So you start with a table here, right? This is just an array with a table string here. And then you basically take some items. This probably comes from the server. And you just map the items and you iterate them, and for each of them, you return something. Of course, here is super simple. We're just doing one row, one cell, and the item itself, which we assume is a string or a number, and that's it. But you can get more involved in this, and in this way, you actually can go quite far in the way you construct views dynamically in JavaScript. And there's no string concatenation, none of those ugly things. So basically, this is how it would work. It's the same thing as before. You just have some items here. You just do an AJAX call. Then you just get the data here. And then you create the object literal. And then you pass it to this magic function called make.html, which exists in real life. I can actually show you the library later if you want. And that's it. And we just append it to the thing. So this was, I don't know, 2 years ago. And I thought I was done, right? I'm free. I don't need a framework. I can do whatever I want. Not really. Not so fast. Let me show you a very simple application. I think we're doing good on time. Yeah, so let me show you the name of the application is Kliko. There's a joke in there for people that speak in Dutch. So it's like a very simple shopping cart. And the idea of this is to show you, I mean, this is very simple, right? So we just basically fetch data from the server. It's not really a server. It's just hard-coded here. But I have some stuff over here in the shopping cart. So if I just look at design, because I really need to learn how to design stuff, as you can tell from the slides and this thing. So I'll just add something to the cart, and it's going to go there, right? I can also take this out, just add, for example, another number here. If I just hide this thing and then show it, this number should persist. It should also persist if I do a reload. So I can add something else, for example, another book here, and it should automatically add it in this row, update the amounts here, update the counters. Like, this is the way it should work. And just something useless, a movie with JSON. And then when I'm done, I'm just going to click checkout here, and it's going to take some information, basically the whole JSON with the cart. And it's going to send it to the server, and it's going to reset the cart. So any shopping cart you do in real life or anything interactive is going to be more complex than this. This is as simple as it gets, right? However, such a simple application has actually a lot of interactions that are non-trivial if you want to get it done right. So, for example, just to reload, right? To get data from the server. It affects everything. It affects both the left view and the right view. It affects the list of items and the list of things you have in the cart. You need to preserve a lot of the user state. In this case, it's both the filter and the amount of things you want in the cart if you haven't clicked on the add to cart thing yet. You have to keep the cart as it is as well. You cannot just delete the data. The filter also affects everything. It affects a counter, it affects the list, and it also has to preserve things that you're not showing. So if you add something to cart, you need to check whether the thing is in the cart or not. Of course, you need to read the box where you say how many items you're adding. You need to validate that as well. You need to, it also affects all the counts in the cart and so forth. I'm not going to stop much on this, but it really takes a lot of effort to get this right with all the interactions you might have. And it's not just the interactions themselves. It's also the order in which the user actually goes through these interactions. There's a lot of possible side effects that can happen if you're doing this imperatively. So you can just write code like this, which I did, like reload, and then you have to update items and update the cart, change the filter, and also you need to get data from the DOM, which gets very ugly very quickly, because you have data all over the place. You have the numbers on the card, maybe they're stored in the DOM, right? Like that's the old school jQuery way of doing it. So or you have the filter value in the input field, and you need to get it from there. That's where it lives, right? So it became very ugly very quickly. You have to write all this code for such a simple application, right? So, like for example, to update the card, you have to do all of these things. Go, iterate, DOM, elements, hide, update, remove, add, conditionally, right? It's a mess, and it gets worse. So this is the core thing I want you to take away from this part, which is every new feature that you add to this application, if you're writing it imperatively, has to accommodate and be accommodated by the other features, because in any view, you will have a lot of these interactions. So this is basically means that for every new feature you add, is not an amount of effort that stays the same. It's not that the first feature cost me 5 hours and the second feature cost me 5 hours. It's more like the first thing cost me 5, the second cost me 7, the third cost me 11, and then it grows. The more features you add, the faster the complexity and the time and the possibility for bugs grow. So this is a problem. This is unacceptable. So basically, I had a last resort. Okay, I was desperate because I really want to use a framework. So I'm just going to say, okay, I'm going to have a store in JavaScript, which was actually a good idea, and it's actually what React does. I just have one object that I call store. And I'm going to put everything there. The stuff that I get from the server and the state from the user himself, like the filters or the add to cart, all the relevant information has to be inside this store. This actually ended up to be a good idea. And then what I did was, for example, I'm writing this input, which would be the filter. So I said on input, when the filter changes, I'm just going to set store that filter to the value of the filter, and I'm just going to call this magic function called redraw. And what redraw does is basically throw an atomic bomb on the area that I'm redrawing and just redo the whole thing again. This is like the nuclear option. It works. It's consistent. You don't actually have to track the dependencies because you do everything anew each time. But of course, you know, this is not a good idea. And this is for 2 reasons. Number 1, performance. Because if you're in this phone, it definitely is going to take a long while to redo a complex view. And number 2 is that there's actually quite a few stateful things in the app that you cannot capture within JavaScript. For example, certain dropdowns, the position of the dropdowns, it's very hard or impossible to know where the user left them, or the scroll as well, if you're in a long page. So throwing a nuclear bomb every time you touch something is not an option, and I learned that the hard way. So where are we now? Okay. So anyway, after Atomic Bomb, I basically was trying to picture it in my mind, how this should be organized. And I want a magic view function that I'm just going to pass like the target, I should say, the place where I want to retrieve the information from. In this case, I put it in green, which would be like the items. Would be the items that I get from the server to list in my shopping cart. And then I'm just going to get the items, I just put them in yellow. And the same thing. I also want to make another view inside the other one that takes into account the filter, right? I want to see the state of the filter. The filter determines whether I show something or I hide something. So I just take the filter here. And here, I basically go through the items, and if the item matches the filter, then I return a cell with the item. Otherwise, I don't return squat, which means nothing is going to be shown for that item. And that's it. This is what I wanted. I was like dreaming about this, but how the hell we do this? So events are a very natural way of expressing this. So basically, I will tell you how we connect these two, and then we are done. So here, think of events. For example, I'm just updating the name of a product, right? So I'm just going to set, in red, I put a verb. And in green, I will put what's called a path. It should be a target, but it's the path. And think of REST for a minute. We have verbs, which are get, post, put, delete. They have very clear semantics, right? But just let's think a little bit more broad. So you have the verbs in REST, and you also have the paths. Like I'm going to get /API/items, for example. Or I'm just going to do a post to /API/cart/to, whatever. So this is an extension of the concept of REST. So I'm setting a filter to the value kitties, or I'm setting items to this whole thing. Or I'm adding an item to I'm adding an item to items, or I'm removing the first item. So this is the big 3. You have a verb, you have paths, and you have an argument. So here I just want to show you that the path can actually be nested. This would be like something like /items/0/title. So you can actually update something within a nested object. You don't have to do the whole thing anew. And here I did these views that have no verb, right? Because there's nothing in red. I just say the path is items, and this is what I get. What happens here is that I basically create a hidden verb called change. So whenever you add, set, or remove, not only you are modifying this global store we spoke about, we also trigger this change event. And the views implicitly work with this change event. So whenever the relevant part of the store changes, the view is going to be notified and said, okay, I'm just returning you again what the view should be. So the view doesn't care how the thing was before. It just lives for the day and says, this is how the data is now. Okay, this is what you should display. That's it. And I don't do anything else. And this works. So this is how I actually put together my framework. I use the object literals for templating. I used events with a verb plus a path. And then I just have a global store that is updated by the events. And then a view is just a function of the store, which is triggered by a relevant event. And that's it. And I more or less have been creating intermediate level complexity applications in this way, and it actually scales, at least conceptually. Like I can add a new feature, and I don't have to be working around all the other features trying to make it work in the old imperative way. So this is the name of the library. It's called Gatov. And so, of course, if you want to talk about it, just ask about it later. It's open source. It's in GitHub. Feel free to take a look. And I have a couple of questions for you, but I think there's not enough time. No, I think I'll just move on. There's no time for questions either, but you can ask me later. And I really wanted to thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, Federico.
Yep.
Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions.
No worries.
But you can catch him during the break, which
for
we'll
sure.
have after the second talk. And until the second speaker will switch. By the way, Yelena, you can grab the handheld microphone. But during the small break, could you just pass a bit? I'll do a few other pitches, which didn't get into the intro.
Yeah, thank you.
Is it on? Is it on? Thank you.
Rick, can you please help wiring the headset?
Yeah, sure.
Right, and meanwhile, when the second speaker is preparing, I just wanted to do some other things and mention about the speech session which we'll have after the second talk and just before the break and the interview. So my name is Robert. If you haven't met me before, I am organizing or co-organizing quite a bunch of events. So apart from helping out with AmsterdamJS, I also do React and React Native Amsterdam. So if you have any questions about that, please reach me. We're always happy to get also speakers and get some new ideas for our events. And what I wanted to do just in this small break is to share some insights about few React conferences if you're into that. If you are not into writing your own framework but want to get some stuff for free, like not developing the things, you can visit the React Day Berlin, which we also co-organized after the React Amsterdam. It's going to be a smaller, of course, event, as it's just the first year as we start in Berlin, but it should be really cozy and really Meetup-ish, but of course better with around 400 attendees. And another event that I wanted to share with you and also to give you some additional perks is ReactiveConf. Maybe you heard about it. It's a really big, huge conference in Bratislava. And they shared some discounts with us. If you type AmsterdamJS in their ticket form, you'll get a 15% discount. And more than that, you can also get a free ticket if you like to go to ReactiveConf by submitting a talk to one of our meetups, or specifically to AmsterdamJS meetup. So if you have a talk, like a lightning talk, starting from 5 minutes to a fully-fledged talk of 30 minutes, just feel free to kick some ideas in. As Tim mentioned, we also have a speaker bootcamp. So if you don't feel really comfortable speaking or you want to get some help before you get on the stage, we have a lot of people really willing to help, really willing to spend some of their extra time to teach you and mentor you a bit. So till the September 22nd, and basically starting from the August, as quite a lot of people been submitting talks since August when we started calling for that. If you'll submit a talk or just any idea that you'd like to speak, as I said, from 5 to 30 minutes, we'll just raffle the free ticket for ReactiveCon first, and then we'll do similar campaigns to other events, as we want to give back something to speakers as well, and really want to have a lot more activity in our Call for Speakers forum. And a short intro about the pitch session that you saw in the description that is in the agenda straight after the second talk. The format is basically an open stage format where everybody amongst you can get on a stage and share something like an open source project or some crazy idea you'd like to have more collaborators with. And to do that, just after the second talk, come to me, name your topic. I'll moderate it a bit, so it won't be, so it will be something more relevant to the audience. And you'll have then like 3-minute slots for pitching anything you like with a microphone or slides or whatever. So right after the next talk, I'll be right here. Just come to me if you want to speak up from the stage, something about, again, your open source project. Just do it and submit it. And I had also the same GIF with Just Do It, because we really need to motivate people speaking up. That's what the community is all about. Not only some specific people doing the talk should be here stage sharing some things, but everybody in the community should be open to do that. And the more we have things in common, or the more things we have to discuss, the better. All right, and now we can proceed with the next talk.
We have some t-shirts with us. So if somebody has some nice questions or nice comments or anything else, you can get it.
They need to be nice.
Okay, so we're ready.
So I will thank you again once more for coming with all the rain, etc., etc. But more specifically, I will thank you in advance for following what's going to be a pretty technical presentation. And just a bit of introduction, me and my colleague and mentor, Elena, we work in SonarJS. It's a company that is mostly focused about code quality and code analyzers. And we specifically, we work on...
And we, sorry, it doesn't work.
Specifically, we work on the JavaScript analyzer, and today we're going to go through the different code models that are required to write a code analyzer at multiple levels. Our code analyzer, it works inside different contexts. We have command line tools that execute the code analyzer. We have platforms. It runs in Sonar Cloud, which is the cloud version of the platform. It runs in IDEs. Most IDEs, I would say. We specifically, we are developing the analyzer itself. Sorry. It's good. A little bit closer to a bit closer, more close. Okay. And we work on the analyzer itself, not on all the tools around it that use the analyzer. Okay. So. Let me show you what a code analyzer can typically find when you have all the models in place. So in this example here, we are saying that that condition that is highlighted today is larger than and. Well, that condition is always true. So it doesn't make sense to have that check there. And why do we say that? Well, if you look at is open there, is open is a logical end of start smaller than today and today smaller than end. So it can be true only if both of those are true. Then if we move forward, we see that, in fact, that check is in the else branch of isOpen. So it's when that is false, but that can be false for two different reasons. It can be false because of start is smaller than today, or because today is smaller than end. But since we're inside the else if, the else branch of another if, which is today is smaller than start, well, the only thing that can happen is that today is larger than end. And you can take your time looking at it, of course. Take some moments. So today, I'm going to show you how we get there, how we get to find this stuff. And we start very low level. In fact, we start with the lowest possible level.
Okay, so my turn to speak. So yeah, we will start with the low-level things. And for that, we will use code examples in IDE. And to make it more interesting, we will take some particular rules for each model. For example, here I have a rule about using octal number. When you prefix a number with 0, it's not anymore decimal, it becomes octal. So probably you didn't want to use octal number. What's the point in that? And you wanted to use, you wanted just it to be 3 digits. And let's think which information we need to raise this issue. Basic thing, we just need to know that, okay, here is number, and number starts with 0. But you have an entire file and file text. And knowing that somewhere in the file you have digits starting with 0 is not enough. So for example, if I add the same thing to the identifier, obviously, come on, that's not a problem. And at this level, you need already to split things and to know that, okay, here's the space, or even no space, here's an equal, and here's the new thing starting, and you need to consider it as a separate thing. And this level of analysis we call lexical analysis.
So the lexical analysis is pretty simple. It's just about what is commonly called tokenizing. So you start by just identifying all the tokens in your piece of text, and then you do some basic identification of what are the different tokens. So it can be keywords, punctuators, literals. Yeah. It's difficult to keep this thing this close. So, and identifiers. So you don't move much beyond that, but that's already enough, as you have seen, because you know that that's a number literal, for instance, or it's a string literal. And this is what you basically can do at that level. And then let's see how this is actually implemented, typically this kind of tokenization. It will not be surprising to you. It's kind of a chained set of regular expressions. And there is an order to these expressions. You put them in such an order that there are no overlaps, etc., etc. And you write the regular expressions in a way that everything is exclusive. And the combination of all of these regular expressions, which we call channels, then it gives you all the tokens and groups them all in your big list of tokens with the basic categorization. Okay. Then, to move forward.
Yeah, let's go a bit deeper. For a deeper case, I have still super trivial code. What we see here, we have curly brace, I mean open, close curly brace, open, close. So from the previous level point of view, what we have inside of the parentheses and what we have after them is exactly the same thing. So there are two punctuator tokens followed by each other. Between them there is nothing. So, but here I'm talking about the rule about empty block. So yeah, empty block is a bit thin. You probably should write something inside. And in order to raise this issue, of course, you need some additional information on the top of the tokens. You need to group these tokens. You need to say, what is this token for? And in order to do that, you do syntax. You build a syntax tree of the code.
What did I say? So the syntax model is what most of the people associate to parsing. So, and what most people associate to code analysis. You get to this level of the model, you can implement a lot of different things. And what does it mean? You take the tokens that you had identified initially and you start to group them together into logical structures. So in this case here, we have a function. This function has the keyword function, and then inside that function, we can spot the different components. The function name, foo, the list of parameters, in this case only one, p, and then the body of the function, which in this case is an if statement. And then you go further and you go down recursively. So inside the if, you have the condition, strictly equals, and the body of the if, which is an invocation to a function. And then go down, you have the left operator, the right, the left operand, the right operand of the strictly equals operator. And then inside the call, you identify the name of the function you are calling and the parameter that is being passed to it. Okay? And how do you build this? You build this by recursively navigating inside the structures that you progressively try to match. So you try to say, okay, is this an if statement? Well, to be an if statement, it needs to start with an if. Then it must have a left parenthesis, then it must contain an expression, then it must have a right parenthesis, then a statement, and optionally an else clause. And if it matches these, then it's an if statement. You create it as a node in the if statement. Same for object literal, it needs to start with left curly brace, etc. And this, of course, is recursive. So you are referring to other rules like expression, statement, etc., etc., etc. And they can be, of course, cyclic. So statement will contain the potential to have another if statement inside. Okay?
Sorry, may I ask you a question?
Sure.
Seeing here you using keyword factory, just came up to a question. Are you using object-oriented programming pattern factory, or is it just name of the object, which would then just different types of statements and so on?
You should summarize the question for the
Yeah, indeed. So you're asking if this factory identifier that you have there is pointing to all of these being a factory. If I have to be the object-oriented pattern purist, I would say that this is closer to a builder pattern. This is not a static factory. Let's say the name factory there is just to say, this is our basic object to which I can concatenate my expected, create all the instances or try to match all of these components. So don't expect that, for instance, this thing is an abstract factory that has 5 different implementations. It's the starting point of a builder pattern. Okay? Oh yeah, and if you have any questions to ask, you can also ask them now. We will stop you if it takes too long, of course.
Okay. And then if we go on next step, here I have a rule about unused variable. Made this case a bit trickier because I have variable x declared here and then variable x again declared here, but this one is used on next line, and as it is a block declaration, this x is not the same x as here. If I would do it with var keyword, of course it will be the same thing. With let and const we have block declarations. So I'm starting to talk about variables. here we need some semantic information to know that, okay, this identifier in this syntax tree, let's say, is not the same identifier as here, but this one is the same as here. And if I will remove a constant keyword, and so there is no more declaration for that x, that means that this x is the same as this x. So in order to know that, we need to build a semantic model.
So on top of the semantic of the syntactic model, what you can build is this. You can start to correlate the different syntactic nodes that you had identified to start say, okay, this is an X identifier, but it's not just an X identifier. It's the same symbol that was declared before. So in this case, you start and say, okay, I find that there is a parameter declaration called P, and then there is this same parameter is red in the second line. And then there is a function that is declared in the beginning of this example, and it's invoked at the end of this example. And then there is a variable that is declared. It's declared in the almost the last line of the example, and it's written because we write the value 42, and it's red. So there we have a parameter called P and a variable called P, but we don't mix them together, and we correlate with the different writes and read operations and declarations. Okay?
Okay, so I think we should go a bit faster. So next step, this a rule which we call a dead store. That means that you put something to a variable, and then you never use this value. Either you rewrite it with another value, or you just exit the scope of the variable, so the value is just thrown away. Here I have variable x. It is rewritten in condition, in condition, and then we return the value. So this value is never used. If we do something here with this x, so we will return it if it's else. Then we are fine. This value will be used. Here I started to speak about paths of execution, and in order to know which is what are the paths of execution in the program, we need to build a control flow graph.
Yeah. So this code is a bit unnatural. It's done a bit on purpose, but it's just to show you that control flow graphs can do stuff that is not natural to the developer, and that's where things start to get interesting, in fact. So, for instance, what is the first expression that is evaluated when this function is invoked, in your opinion? I'm not going to proceed unless you answer. So.
And dirty shorts.
Dirty shorts.
There is nothing to proceed
there is
if
no
it is empty.
It's empty. Assignment of I.
Because you are going to call the function from outside, the first thing is going to get local parameter get initialized.
Yeah, but from within the function.
Yeah,
starting
let's
with. So
It will return because if it's below 10, it will return, right? So there will be no further.
yeah, that's one of the options that it returns. But
So
first, it must.
no, that is below 10. No.
Now, the first thing that happens is this. It's the I smaller than 10. Okay? Then there is evaluation of the second part of the logical AND. Then the invocation of array push. Then there is the incrementer. That's where we increment. And then what happens? What happens after this?
I already
Oh,
showed.
you already showed. Too easy. And this is the loop. And this is the model of the loop. And you can actually navigate it once you have built this graph this way. But there are other options that we have not yet covered. So the option where the second conditional is false, then it returns, and after it returns, end of this function graph. But there is one thing more that is still missing, one possible branch, which is Come on, try.
The green are the one which are branching.
Yeah. If
What is false?
P is false. Exactly. When I is more than 10, there is the shortcut. You don't even evaluate. You don't go through P equal true. You just go directly to the return. So that's a different branch. Okay? And then there is more, in fact. With this kind of graph, you go more into the details. Here we have compacted the thing, but I will show you the details of one of these calls. So in fact, what you get with this graph is more detailed. If you can. So first, you read the array. You check, okay, this array identifier is there. Then you check that the property push of array is there. Then you check that I is there, and then finally there is the invocation. And this is very useful when you have to create the control flow graph of one-liners that can have ternary operators, etc., and it's only one single line, and the control flow graph will navigate through these details. And then you can write your logic on top of this model. Okay? Quickly, how do you build this? Well, this is not for SonarJS, it's the other analyzer we write, which is for TypeScript. So you just navigate your syntax tokens, syntax nodes, from the bottom up, from the end of the function, and you say, okay, current is the latest block that you have created, and you say, okay, for the time being, it's the block that is used when it's false. Then, if the if statement that I'm analyzing contains an else, the real when false block is the one that is built from the if statement dot else statement. Okay? And then you proceed concatenating and you build all of this graph from the bottom up, and you get cycles, etc., with this kind of recursion starting from the syntax model. Okay? Fine.
Okay, and finally we come to the most interesting part where we put all together. We put together our knowledge of the flow in the program, and we add in one more thing. We are starting to trying to track the values of variables. Not maybe exact values, but at least some knowledge about variables. In this example, I have a which has the same value as x. I'm checking that x is 0, and if in this case I will increment x, and obviously then x will be greater than a, so this condition is always true. If, for example, I will decrement it, then it will be less than, and we have a condition which is always false. And And this we call a data flow model. In this example of the code, I have a message, and so again, a small question for you. What will be the knowledge about the program at the point which these questions are showing? So like here, what do we know? Just from here. What do we know about variables? Yeah, exactly. So that's mainly the only thing we know about the program state in this point. Do you remember everyone who's answering?
Only the good ones.
Okay, good. So then we starting to navigate our control flow graph, and we enter first the we enter in the if. At that point, as we entered it, we are sure that condition was true. That means that P was true. And message is still undefined before this assignment. And when we go in further that flow, that path of execution, we leave in this if. Message already has a different value. It was assigned. P is still equal true. We we execute our last statement. Everything is fine. Then let's imagine different path of execution. We didn't enter the if. If we didn't enter the if, we know that P was not true. And we know that message is still undefined. What will happen? Error, yeah. So we will have type error because we will call a property on an undefined value. And that's mainly all the layers which we wanted to talk about.
So, in summary, and this is her metaphor, in fact, it's very similar to a compiler. Now, it's strange to speak of compilers to JavaScript people, but let's say it's also true for transpilers. So, all of these layers are very similar. The only difference is that where the compiler moves from semantic analysis to code generation, then to code optimization, well, instead of this, you replace other layers, which are data flow analysis, and then finally the rules on top that are using all of the models. Okay, and this is kind of it. But is it really all of it? There is one further step, which is the cross-procedure data flow model, which is what happens when you need to find stuff by going through functions. So in this case, in this example, it's very similar to the example before, but we are not able to say that there is a branch that will cause a problem, a type error, because the actual call to text to uppercase is inside a function, and we don't know what happens in the function. So what we have to do is that we propagate the information through the functions. And then we associate the value that was passed to the parameter to inside the function. And that way, we find that there is a problem. And this is kind of the next step for us. It's a cross-procedural data flow. So we've gone through all of them. You get the type error, and that's it. So, thanks a lot. And if you have any questions, if there is time for questions at all.
Thank you. Thank you, Elena, Carlo. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so I'm not sure
Any questions later?
If there's much more time for questions, but
I have time to give t-shirts.
I hope we have a couple of winners for the t-shirts.
Yeah.
So maybe you can do it while I introduce the next section of the schedule, which is break. Now we have 10 minutes of break. You can have a drink at the bar. If you pass them the code word AmsterdamJS, they may have some budget left on our tab. If not, then you're unlucky and you have to give them €2. We'll be back in 10 minutes with the last section of our program, which is an exciting new item which we haven't done before. So see you all in 10 minutes. 1990. When did you start, people? When did you start?
I started in 1998.
1998, and how that compares to being a web developer right now, and he probably has some strong opinions, or one way or the other. So we're gonna hear all about it. Please give a warm welcome to our guest tonight, the epic founding father, or should I say, enfant terrible of the Dutch web development scene, Pieter Paul Koch, PPK.
Thank you.
All right. It's not a dumpster fire, but it'll do.
It's pretty nice.
Yeah. So thanks, Pieter Paul, for joining us. We're AmsterdamJS, which is probably, your arch enemy on the web in some ways, but
Not at all.
not at all.
I mean, I think I actually spoke at one of the very first AmsterdamJS meetings ever.
Wow.
I think it was in the Cloud9 offices. back
Really?
then. Yes, I think so.
I have a black hole in my memory there.
Keizersgracht, somewhere over there.
Yeah, I think we were buying free beer for infinity, right, at the
Yeah,
time.
could be. I talked. I talk for a living. I will continue to talk until somebody shuts me up. But go ahead.
So to do a bit of context, who has met PPK before?
You?
That's awesome. So I mean, PPK I think is an icon in the web developer world, really, and has done a ton of stuff for the scene and for people involved. And I mean, I remember just going a lot to Quirks mode and learning about all the different things. Browsers would be supporting or not. Why don't we dive in there? But I'm curious. Why did you start this?
Why did I start it?
Yeah.
Because there was nothing. Back in 1998, listen, this is like a really long time ago. Back in 1998, we wrote JavaScript on those marble slabs, right? And we have to carefully chisel out all the stuff that we want to write. And we made a mistake. We had to order a new marble slab. And when we were done, it wouldn't work in any browser whatsoever. So it was really a different time. But back then, there was Netscape 4 and IE4. Who here remembers Netscape 4?
I do.
Okay, a few. You know how terrible it was. Oh, there's a new Netscape 4 version.
That thing
Let's see if our sites crash on it. That was really like what...
Well, wait a second. I think that NetBeans IDE, while running website simulation, still uses sort of that Wild Web browser. So you can read it even today.
Well, I mean, it was just a terrible browser. I mean, that's not mince words.
Well, actually, according to
like it.
Netscape 3, it was a giant leap forward, right?
I used to think so, but not
Tables.
anymore. But let's not quibble about browsers who are dead and gone for a long time.
Yeah, but
In any case, my point, the point I was trying to make was you had Netscape 4 and IE4, and you had to write radically different JavaScript for the two, because back then Netscape and Microsoft couldn't agree on anything, especially not on web standards. And there were a lot of sites that said, yeah, you can use this cool effect, this drop-down menus or something. Drop-down menus were real hot and happening back then. It was something completely new and very revolutionary. And they said, okay, this is a script for Netscape 4, and this is a script for IE4. And you combine them like this. And I said, yeah, that's fine, but where can I find more information? Why does this work in Netscape 4, and why does that work in IE4? And basically there was nothing, so I said, okay, I'll do it myself, I'll figure it out myself. I mean, I had a very rough time at the start because it was just impossible to get some features right. I vividly remember, this was back in 2000 or so, so okay, I'm now going to write the definitive drag and drop script for Netscape 4 and IE4 and IE5 and a few other browsers. I couldn't get it to work. And the worst part was I had an example that actually did work, and the problem was Netscape 4 on Mac. And I had an example that did work in Netscape 4 on Mac, but I couldn't figure out why that example worked and mine did not.
Don't you think that you just hit the nail why developers like web development? Because it's just a giant puzzle. And it just gives them this
I mean,
little
it's
bit to make it work.
incredible. I mean, you actually get a real sense of achievement once you got something working in all browsers. I mean, you will all have found that at a certain point in your career. Oh, wow. And now I do this and that, and I branch my code like this, and now all of a sudden it works everywhere. Okay, let's not touch it anymore.
So
Right?
I wonder, when did you realize that what you were doing was something, that it had like some impact? Like I'm always wondering, like when you want to build something, at some point you're wondering, are people using it? Like, is what I'm building kind of worth something? Are people liking it? How did that develop for you? Like, what was the moment when you were like, okay, wow, what I'm building now, people are using, it's actually having impact. Did you see
You
that?
mean my site?
Yeah.
I kind of started to realize it when I got more mail and more mail and more mail, and people asked me, okay, do you know about this? No, I'm sorry, I don't know. What an interesting bug.
Yeah, why doesn't this work on IE on Mac and stuff like that?
Yeah, that was a wholly different topic, of course. But what really drove it home for me personally was the very first web conference ever in Europe at Media 2005. Who here was at Media 2005 in London? Nobody. Well, it was epic. In the sense that it was something that had just never happened, right? There were, let's call it 400 people together, and they were all web developers, so they were all kind of doing what I did, right? With HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and they kind of all came together and started talking to one another, and there were interesting presentations, so there were lots of beers. And when you, excuse me, when you complained about a certain Netscape or IE bug, they actually understood what you were talking about. Not like your manager or something who just says, yeah, make it work. Yeah, but it's really impossible. I don't care, make it work. No, here you could talk to some people who actually said, yes, we know it's impossible. Terrible, isn't it? Have another beer. Yes, let's have another beer. And that's what you're looking for, you know? I kind of assume that's why most of you are here right now, just to find some people who go through the same pain as you do.
Yeah, definitely. What is the hardest thing you found ever in web development?
The hardest thing wow.
Where you really were like, this is just not possible. You know, you walk around right around and then it doesn't work, and you walk around left around and then it does work. Like our video system tonight.
It's terrible, your video system? It works in browsers.
Supposedly, yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, but we have to plug it in a particular order into the computer. It's amazing.
Obviously.
It's almost web development.
Yes. Technically speaking, I don't know. At least I've gone through so much that I can't remember one specific
What
one.
about the mobile space?
Yes, I was coming to that.
Okay.
I mean, I was very fortunate in the sense that I could already start with mobile web development back in 2009, when it was not on the agenda of the average web developer.
Fortunate with quotes, right?
Well, no, it was hard work. Nikolai knows about this. We cooperated for a while. You know, I came in this lab in the Vodafone offices in Düsseldorf, and they said, yeah, we've got 3 cupboards full of mobile phones here. Really, 3 cupboards full of mobile phones. There must have been 200 or 300. And as far as we're concerned, you can test all of them. Which was kind of cool, but I also thought, yeah, it's maybe a bit too much. And there were some really, really weird devices there. So I decided to skip it and say, okay, I'm going to start with the modern Nokias. Well, doesn't matter. What I noticed then is, first of all, that there were a lot more browsers on mobile than there were on desktop. Right? Even today, that's still true. But I kind of expected that. I wasn't really surprised by it. What I was surprised by is how few web developers were really interested in all that. What I've noticed time and again in my career is that web developers dislike testing on more than 2 or 3 browsers. As far as I'm concerned, that is the core of web development, is making sure that your stuff works everywhere. And it won't work perfectly, of course. There will be some errors here and there, and you have to code defensively in order to solve those errors. But my biggest surprise really was, okay, I found out all this cool stuff about browsers nobody ever heard of, and nobody really cared. That's still the case nowadays.
Why do you think that is?
Because I think web developers think, okay, well, we've got enough on our plate already. You know, we've got to get this working and that working, and it's all terrible, and oh God, I'm so glad it works now in Chrome, and it works in Safari, and it works in IE, and it works in Firefox. Okay, we're done now. Okay, thank you. And I can kind of imagine, I had the same feeling myself, but it's still something that bothers me. There's a question from the audience.
Yeah, the question that I wanted to ask is exactly about the statement that you've just made about the browsers. About the statement that you've just made about the browsers, that it should work everywhere, in your opinion. By saying work everywhere, do you mean also the outdated browsers or outdated versions of actual browsers as well?
In theory, yes. In practice, it's difficult. Yes, I know. But this is one of the problems I'm having with modern web development. It feels as if we stopped caring about that. And I'm not saying, I'll get to you in a moment. I'm not saying that I can't understand why you say, at a certain point you say enough is enough. But there is a certain trend I'm noticing towards saying, okay, we kind of clean our hands from the browsers at all. We just say we have a tool chain and now it works because the tool chain will make sure that it does work. And I fundamentally disagree on a fundamental level with that. We have to continue testing on all the browsers. Not because we have to make our website work perfectly on those older browsers, that's impossible, but in order to make sure that the users get at least a decent experience, that at least they can read the text and fill out a form.
Right,
and
but
click
you
on
know,
links.
browser vendors have been really working hard to get their release cycles almost immediate, right?
Yes.
So it's also a measure of which browser space or user space you're targeting. If you're like corporate intranet,
Yes, that is different.
very different from startup, right?
True, absolutely. But it's the problem I'm having with browser release cycles. First of all, I have a personal problem as a browser tester. I mean, it's wonderful for the rest of the world, but it's terrible for me because it happened several times that I was in the middle of some very complicated tests. And, you know, I would continue the following day, and the following day I started my computer, and the bloody browser has updated. That is atrocious. If you're testing in Chrome 46, I want to finish my test in Chrome 46 and not switch to 47 halfway through. That's the one problem I personally have with release cycles. The other problem that you sometimes see is that people tend to forget that not everybody is on that release cycle. I mean, there are plenty of mobile phones sold, for instance, in China, which have the latest Google Chrome on them at the moment that they've been sold, but don't contain the Play Store, so cannot be updated. And that is something people tend not to realize too much.
Okay.
Wait a minute, there is a question from the audience there.
Thank you. Yeah, so there's something very interesting I think you're saying, and we seem to be skirting the issue, but when the computer tells me if you use this or that, you're supporting 95% of all users out there, I'm happy. But I'm not sure I'm hearing that you would also be happy.
Define supporting. I mean, if you say on 95% of my users' computers my website works perfectly, that's great. But what about the other 5%? Your website will not work perfectly, that's impossible because their browsers are so old, but will they at least be able to read the text?
Yeah, I'm arguing pretty much completely broken. The sort of Twitter, you can't press the tweet button anymore. And
yeah, but that's terrible. I think that we as web developers are not doing our jobs when we do that. Lose a lot of functionality? Yes, of course we do. But you should be able to, what I said, read text and fill out forms.
I mean, this might sound kind of obvious, but you're saying that every person should be able to access what you're building. That's kind of what you're saying.
Yes.
Right.
It depends. I mean, if you're creating a very specialized app for a corporate intranet, yes, of course it's different. But to me, it's about the principle of the matter. I think we should try a little harder. I think we should spend a few hours at least to make sure, you know, just start up your favorite browser, turn off JavaScript, load your site. And then make sure that you can access the information and can fill out forms. That's really it.
Yeah, so that brings me to a very interesting question for me is that how do you define a browser? What is that thing?
A browser is a piece of software that interprets HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Okay, and is that documents? Is that applications? Is that games? Do you have a specific?
No, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
What about links?
Excuse me?
Links.
Links are a part of HTML.
It doesn't read CSS, if I'm correct.
There are a few browsers that do not read CSS. Oh, you mean links? Ah, okay, sorry, now I understand you. Yes, it's a browser. Mostly for historical reasons. If it were to be released today, I would not count it as a browser. But because it's been around forever, I'd say, okay, it's a browser.
So what do you think about dropping historic compatibilities? Is the web something that is supposed to work? Like, should I be able to load up a site from '98, or is it? Can we
awesome
break
would
it?
that be?
Well, sites from '98 work. I mean, I forgot who tweeted it, but I think it was Brian Rieger, I'm not 100% sure, but he said, yeah, you know, nowadays, sites that were written 10 years ago, they work fine, but sites that were written 2 years ago don't, because we're too much invested in always using the new stuff because it is new stuff, and we should be using new stuff because it's good on our CV.
Right. So you know, us JavaScript developers have been using JavaScript to sort of like pave over all of the humps in the browsers, right? The compatibilities. And now with the rise of React, we've sort of disconnected completely from HTML as a definition structure. What do you think about that?
Terrible. I mean, it again goes back to what I said earlier. Your website should work for everyone, which means they should be able to read the text, which means you need basic plain HTML.
Right, but so that's what I'm saying. Like, the definition of what a browser is for you is more aligned to being a document viewer than being an application platform.
But they can do both.
Isn't that maybe the cause of most of the pain, that there is no clear definition and that everybody's trying to do both whilst not having a focus on it?
Maybe, possibly, I don't know. I mean, if you were to make a browser today that does not support HTML, you will be laughed out of business. Same for CSS, same for JavaScript. So that's why I define a browser as a piece of software that supports HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. What we do with it can depend heavily on one of those three legs. I mean, the really, really old sites from the early 90s, they are basically only plain HTML with a bunch of images, but they still work fine. And then we started to use a lot of JavaScript back in the DHTML days. Then we cut back on the JavaScript, and we returned to JavaScript from the rise of the first libraries. You know, it's all a cyclical pattern. It might come to pass that we start to rely less on JavaScript in the future. I'm not saying it will happen, but I'm saying we should be ready for that eventuality.
I was just kind of thinking maybe it's really more of a thing of that the libraries should be. Like, I'm lazy, really. I just want to build something. I guess we're all lazy.
Everybody's lazy.
No, indeed, but it's just like so much work to make everything, work in everything.
Well, I mean,
make it accessible. And so, like, I mean, maybe your library could just do everything, and then, we can just sort of build for one platform, and the rest is covered automatically.
Well, I am not saying that you should test on every single browser out there, because that's impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, even I don't have a complete list of all browsers out there. I mean, it was only 2 months ago that I saw on a friend's phone, a very old phone, a browser I've never heard of. And it's a completely shitty browser, and you should definitely not test your website on it, but it wasn't on my list. Which means that you have to get into the habit of defensive coding. It's saying, okay, I've written this cool JavaScript that perfectly displays my data if this user supports this and that and that. If you spend 3 weeks on that, you can spend a few hours on the opposite use case. Okay, but suppose it just doesn't work. Can we just send the data as HTML tables or whatever? I mean, I don't think I'm asking too much if I say that you should spend about 10% of your time on non-optimal use cases, such as all the browsers. And it's what I said before, just turn off your JavaScript, fire up your site, and see what works and what doesn't. That's really all I'm asking of you.
That's a great idea. I think we'd be shocked. I would be.
Yeah, there are certain problems with certain sites, yes.
Yeah.
So let's keep it at that.
So in your testing abilities, you of course have a lot of contact with browser vendors, right?
Yes.
So what is that contact like? Do they love you? Do they hate you?
It's a mixture of both. Especially Google is becoming an interesting love-hate relationship.
Yeah, I saw your latest inner views.
Yeah, well, yeah, inner width and inner height. I am guardian of the viewports, and I tell them what you're doing now is just plain wrong. I'm not going to go into the technical details because that would require a presentation of its own. Suffice it to say that I think Google has made a minor but serious mistake in Chrome 61, and I'm going to call on them in public to solve
And
it.
in your experience, does that work?
It worked last time. I mean, we had exactly the same issue a year and a half ago, and then they backtracked and said, okay, yeah. So maybe, we don't know. But this is a very technical topic, so I don't want to go into
No,
too
no, I'm
much.
just trying to focus on the interaction you have
Yeah,
as a
yeah,
person.
no, I mean,
So do you call on other people to support your case?
I try, that's why I blog. Though it seems that blogs are dead. Did you hear the news? Blogs are dead and everybody should write on Medium. I don't, but just so you know. I'm hoping that people will support me, of course. I will probably send out mails to other browser vendors just asking, hey, do you agree with this or not? Sometimes that helps. And sometimes they say, yeah, maybe we'll agree, here's an argument.
And in your perspective, what does the landscape look like of browser vendors in the W3C? I mean, it's very opaque to us web developers, but you may have a view unique to us.
Google, of course, has the upper hand right now. That's obvious. The rest of them tries to follow along where Google leads. Now the question becomes, is that good or bad? And I think it's a bit of both. Google takes the lead in most specifications we've seen over the past years. Some of them are excellent ideas, others not so much, or are just, you know, the problem with Google is that they over-engineer everything. They start out with an excellent idea, saying, hey, we should solve this use case. And web developers, yeah, no, that would be a great idea. And then they over-engineer to such an extent that nobody has the faintest clue what's going on anymore, and they have to download the library in order to actually use the specification. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is wrong.
And that includes progressive web apps?
Not sure yet. I hope not. It might include service workers, but not progressive web apps as such. But I'm not 100% sure.
Can you elaborate the service worker thought?
Because, well, I tried to study it a little bit. I failed, so I don't know too much about it. But it seems that it may be a little too low level. And I know that they did this deliberately, but it could be that they went too far off in that direction. But again, this is not a formal test-based comment, but just a feeling I'm having. Okay, so we have Google in this rather unique position because if the most apt comparison is, of course, with Microsoft of 10 years back. Microsoft was dominating the web world back then because IE had an, 85% market share. What did Microsoft do with it? Absolutely nothing. What does Google do with it? Rather too much, I would say. So we have to find a balance between the Microsoft model and the Google model. The rest of the browser vendors, well, Apple doesn't talk to anyone, so whatever. Microsoft is doing some pretty interesting stuff. I don't know about you, but I kind of like Edge. I mean, you will have a quibble, okay, it doesn't support this, it doesn't support that, but that's not quite what I mean. I mean that it's a good browser, and it will only become better, and especially that the mindset of Microsoft has changed vastly over the last few years. I mean, they used to talk to web developers, but now let's say they also listen, and listen really carefully. Firefox is in deep trouble because they missed the mobile boat. They were far too late in making the switch to mobile. If they've done it in time, if they had started on something Firefox OS-like back in 2007, 2008, they would still be a power to reckon with, but they have just plain missed that.
Is it not just because they keep, like iOS keeps other browser vendors off their platform?
They could have tried with Android. Why didn't they try to become the default browser for some certain Android vendor? I mean, that was the obvious thing, right? You had Android, Google made it free for reasons I won't get into now, but then Sony picked it up and Samsung picked it up and HTC and Huawei and all the other Chinese and Motorola, etc., etc., etc. They all needed a browser, but there really was only one browser, which I call Android WebKit, which is not Google Chrome, but the other browser that used to run on Android. If Firefox or anyone else would have stepped up and said, hey, we've got another browser for you, it would have led to an interesting situation, but they didn't. I mean, that is also one of the problems with the current Android ecosystem. I would love Google to have some competition there. I would love, for instance, Microsoft to step up and say, hey, we ported Edge to Android. How cool would that be? And on Android, you are required to use all of what's called Google services, a certain package, or none of it. And Google services includes things such as Google Play, Google Maps, many more interesting apps, and also Google Chrome. So if Microsoft were to say, hey, we've got a competing package for Google services, that would be interesting. Or any other vendor. In that light, the final browser vendor I want to mention is the newcomer, Samsung. Samsung is creating its own browser based on Chromium, but about a year ago it started talking to web developers. And if you know anything about the big Asian companies and communication, you will know that that is extremely unusual. Before that, Asian companies just didn't talk to web developers. Because that was, I don't know, beneath their dignity or something. I don't know. I tried, and I couldn't get anyone to talk to. That changed with Samsung. Potentially, possibly, maybe, Samsung could also become a competitor of Google on service level. So what we're seeing here is not really a browser war, but more who dominates the services on the mobile phone. And with the services, I just mean the apps you use really a lot. Right now, obviously, the answer is Google and Apple. And Apple has locked down iOS, so nothing will change there. But Android is still kind of open, so it will be very interesting to see what happens there.
Thanks a lot. I have a completely different question. So throughout your career, what's the one thing you would have liked to learn earlier rather than later? Like where you're like, oh, I really, like this is the one thing which kind of, you know, which took me a while until I got it. Like if someone would have told me this
SVG.
earlier.
I still don't really understand SVG. Back again in 2009 when I worked at Vodafone, the people there said, yeah, SVG is really important to us because it scales. So we don't need to know how wide or how small the mobile phone display is. I said, yeah, that's a very interesting point. And I made a note and I've never took it any further. I should have learned SVG.
Okay. So on that note, have you ever lost faith in the web at some point in time where you were just like throwing out some phone into the window and just went like, this never happened?
For a while I had a special padded room where I was allowed to throw phones to the wall. But that was not losing faith in the web, but in that particular phone or in that particular browser vendor. No, I have never lost faith in the web. I have lost faith in the web developer community from time to time, especially now when we're still, when we're again going on with, you know, the average site is just too big. You know, it has too much JavaScript, too much stuff. Remove some of it. That's basically what should happen, but what won't happen. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. I won't go into it, but so I sometimes despair of web developers.
So where do you see this in 5 years or 10 years from now?
Good question. There is currently a school of thought, especially Peter Gaston in the UK and the Riegers in Canada, who say, yeah, the web is going to become much less important than it is today. Mostly because one of the Riegers said, okay, the browser is going to disappear as a consumer product. That is, consumers will turn to the browser fewer and fewer times because their needs are met by the Facebook app, the Twitter app, all kinds of apps.
Messaging.
Which is possible. Note that it does not mean that the browser will disappear as a technical piece of software, because a lot still has to happen under the hood. If the Facebook app shows a web page inside it, it uses a browser, obviously, because that's the only way of showing a web page. But if that happens, web development could become much less important than it is today, and I'm seriously wondering if that will be a bad idea, or if it would force us to concentrate on the core of our craft. Making something that just works for everybody, instead of putting in more and more JavaScript.
Yeah, I mean, from that perspective, even like the concept of UI is changing a lot, right? You have like the whole messaging platforms and then serverless and
Voice.
I mean, indeed.
I'm not a big believer in voice. But I may be wrong there. I mean, I'm not a specialist in any. AI is really interesting. Maybe one of the things we should keep our eyes on in the next 5 years is, will browsers support a meaningful level of AI? That is to say, simplistically put, can we connect to the camera and show basically what the user is looking at through his phone, and overlay something with interesting information in such a way that the experience is smooth? If the answer is yes, then the browser will be a first-class citizen of the AI world. If the answer is no, then we may have a problem. AR, augmented reality, I'm talking about. Right now, everybody's totally gung-ho on virtual reality. It has its use cases, especially in games and certain forms of industrial design and medical sciences. But other than that, I think for the average consumer, it will be much less interesting than augmented reality, is my guess right now. So we're seeing all these kinds of new things coming together, and I think that the browsers, especially Chrome, is still too much into the idea of emulating native apps, which is what we all decided 10 years ago would be a great idea, and I doubted it at the time. I continue to doubt it today. So yes, the browser landscape is going to change, and if the browser becomes relatively less important to companies who want to get their message out there, then web development will become less important as well. That's, yeah, it's a bit vague and a bit general, but that's the best I can say right now.
Thanks a lot. I'm really looking forward to the next. Denise, yeah, I think just briefly, I think we're kind of slowly wrapping it up. So why don't we turn it into questions?
Yeah, sure. If you can wait for the microphone, if there's a microphone. Yes, but we do need a microphone.
So when we are talking about browser, why we don't talk about a legendary browser, Opera? Because
Opera has clearly told us web developers we don't care about you anymore, because they fired their entire developer relations team, which was one of the best developer relations team in the world.
But why they did that? Because I was having a Symbian phone and Opera Mini was on it. And
Opera Mini is another case. Opera Mini is really, really interesting, and it's still part and parcel of my tests. I'm talking about Opera on desktop and Opera mobile. But the problem is that Opera has always been a fairly opaque company. It was never easy to talk to a technical person there as opposed to a developer relation person. And now it has become much worse because they fired all the developer relations people who we know, Bruce Lawson and Matthias Bijnens and a few others. So it has become impossible for us to talk to technical people. But even when they were still there, it was pretty hard to get hold of the Opera Mini team because they were kind of living in a separate reality or something, I'm not sure. But in any case, I would have to look at the latest stats and how Opera Mini is doing nowadays.
Almost don't exist. Like
Excuse me?
it almost don't exist. Like nobody uses Opera Mini on an Android phone. I hardly see anyone using Opera Mini.
Well, I mean, but in which countries are we talking about?
Like I work for a very big airline company, and when we talk about browser compatibilities, we don't even list Opera Mini there. So it's less than 5% maybe.
Huh, interesting. I would have to look at the latest figure. I mean, it used to be that Opera Mini had a 20, 30, 40, up to even 80% market share in certain countries. For instance, Nigeria, but these are numbers from years ago, and I don't know the current numbers.
In Belarus right now, it's just a remark to the question about Opera Mini. In Belarus, we have 27 or 28% of Opera Mini users on mobile devices.
Really?
Yeah, true, because internet still costs a lot.
Yeah.
Like, not a lot, but it costs.
Yes. Yeah, that is exactly the use case of Opera Mini. It saves people money, especially people who don't have a lot of money to begin with.
Should we have one last question?
I'll ask.
No, let's have someone else. Sorry.
There's also one over there.
Hello. Yeah. What do you think about the war going between these native apps and the web apps? Because they're trying to get merged. Every framework is trying to come with a native framework of their, like React Native, Angular, Native Script. Like, why there is a parallel war going on? Like,
I think it's yesterday's war. I mean, I think that the war was pointless from the start, and that native apps have their certain tasks to do, and the web has another task to do. Besides, what you're seeing, especially in the Facebook and Twitter apps, if you click on a link that's being posted on Facebook or Twitter, where are you being brought to? To a browser in order to show the page that it's all about. So I think, you know, people have always wanted to contrast the web to something else. It used, in the past few years, it was native apps. Before that, it was Flash. I mean, I don't know if anyone here remembers the HTML versus Flash debates that you used to have back, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. Those are also very boring debates because, you know, they are just different technologies and they have different use cases, so they should coexist peacefully together. Thank you so much. So, no, to be honest, the only problem, and I've already referred to this, is that browsers, browser vendors, especially Google, became obsessed by mobile native apps and said, oh yeah, the browser has to support everything that native apps support. For what reason? I don't know. That is really the only practical thing that the native versus web debate has done. But as far as I'm concerned, it's yesterday's debate and it's not really interesting anymore. There's, I think, one final question over there. Oh.
You're saying to try to turn off the...
Could you talk a little louder?
You're saying to try to turn off the JavaScript, but if your context based on some APIs which you can get an access just with JavaScript. For example, you have a modern IDE which implemented on WebGL, and without JavaScript you can't do this, right? So.
You mean when you are developing that modern IDE? Yes. That's okay, because if you develop a modern IDE, you have a certain list of things that should work in order for the IDE to work. So I'm not against that. It's just when you create an actual website, where you create something that theoretically should work for all consumers. Then you have to make that test. But if you're developing a very special... The microphone's gone down. A very specialized piece of software for a very specific target audience, I guess it's kind of okay. It's similar to intranets, you know? Yes, our intranet supports IE 10 and 11. Oh.
That is very comforting to know, because that's what I'm doing.
Oh, wonderful.
So, yeah, no, so WebGL is a new technology in which you essentially replace the entire display engine with something different, right? Something new. Mm-hmm. Do you see that as a good direction, or should all of the effort go into keeping HTML where it is?
Well, I mean, it's very simple. HTML browsers will have to continue to support HTML, right? You cannot just ditch HTML because that does not make sense, and you're not a browser anymore. Again, for WebGL, it comes to what use cases are there? Games, obviously. Anything else?
Well, like making applications that are easier than HTML.
Multimedia,
fast text rendering. You can do enormous amounts of things with WebGL that are actually much easier and better than HTML. But
yes, but would you create a website with that technology?
Technically, you could.
Yes, but would you?
That's the question. I'd say it's more focused on making apps or making interactive media or making augmented reality or virtual reality, but not necessarily documents. That's why I'm saying, what technology what do you use a browser for, all right?
Yes. Well, I mean, I think it's not a question of what you use the browser for, but what you use specific technology A for. What do you use WebGL for? Well, you made a very cogent point that there are certain use cases where it's excellently suited, and other use cases where you are better off with just plain old HTML. So that's fine.
All right. I think we're hitting our time limit.
Okay.
Yeah, I think let's.
I think there was one more question from the audience. Or not?
So I think the issue is that we'll keep having these questions. It's gonna
oh.
Be one more.
The issue is that I talk too much.
No. No, the question.
And you didn't believe in talking. That was one of your remarks.
Yes.
So yes.
One more. Okay, this is the last question.
Okay. What do you think about the browser as an operating system? Because it's implementing all those native APIs. What do you think about it? Because if you go 5-10 years, you would say you don't need Android native apps because the browser does all those things.
I think this goes back to what I said just now. What's the use case for this specific technology? In this case, certain APIs. And secondly, it says, okay, the browser must be able to do anything that native apps can do, which I disagree with. So I would say that some things are just not the job of the browser. So I think, well, maybe, but this is an idea I'm having right now on stage, and I haven't thought about it. Maybe it would be a wise idea to restrict ourselves a little bit in what we're actually doing. I mean, we want the web to be everything for everybody, and it can't be. There has to be a certain specific number of use cases that just cannot be met by plain old HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and where we are better off using a different technology. I think we as web developers should acknowledge that. I think we are very bad in finding our particular niche in the technological ecosystem as a whole. We want to be absolutely everybody, everything for absolutely everybody, and I think that's going to go wrong at a certain point in time. And I think this is a nice way to
All right.
close off.
Yeah.
Well, yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I hope it was fun for everybody. And
Let's give it a warm applause, indeed.
And this was our fireside chat, first edition. If you guys think this is a cool format to do another time, let us know on the Slack or in the bar. Yeah, well, that's not my.
Yeah, we'll figure that out indeed. There are some challenges around that. Definitely. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
The fire department said no. Yeah.
Thank you all for being here. If you have suggestions for who should be our next fireside chat interviewee guest, hit us up on the secret Slack channel that nobody can find.